You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Deep Space Nine episode, Starship Down. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
I thought we were doing Watership Down.
Oh, man, the rabbits in this one is going to be really weird. Folks, be sure to stick around to the end of the show. We've got some great listener feedback, actually some really interesting stuff today. And I want you to remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek wherever you encounter it on Facebook at our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Retweet us on Twitter or X, where we're at SQPN, and leave comments wherever you find us. We love to hear from you. And I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network. It's our newest show, and it's going like gangbusters. It's called The Secrets of Sacred Art, which is a video program, so you can see the art as they discuss it. So we also have a podcast audio version, but the video version adds so much more. So be sure to check that out. We have that at sqpn.com/art, or you could just go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you could watch it.
And like Dom says, do check it out, but it actually is nothing like gangbusters. So don't worry. Doesn't start with a screaming siren, doesn't involve catching organized crime members.
Right. No gang signs or anything. Yeah.
Gangbusters was a real show that is the origin of the phrase coming on like gangbusters.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Nice.
All right. Well, today we're not discussing gangbusters. We're discussing Starship Down. So, Jimmy, could you give us a recap of what happens in this one?
This week we get a submarine warfare episode. Captain Sisko and the gang are on the Defiant in the Gamma Quadrant. They're helping negotiations with a Gamma Quadrant race that Quark has been cheating. But things go even more sideways when the Jem-Hadar show up and chase the alien ship into a nearby gas giant. The Defiant follows them in, but a series of disasters then happens. There's a hull breach from the pressure of the gas giant. Weapons fire from the Jem-Hadar takes the bridge offline and severely injures Captain Sisko. And a Jem-Hadar torpedo impacts the ship but doesn't explode immediately. All of this gives us a series of side quests for our main characters. Julian must keep Jadzia alive in the hull breach section of the ship. Kyra must keep the concussed Sisko awake on the bridge. Worf must learn to work constructively with Chief O'Brien's engineering staff, and Quark must work with the alien trade delegate he cheated to defuse the torpedo. In the end, they all succeed on their side quests, and we have bonding experiences all round. They then manage to destroy the Jem-Hadar and rescue the alien ship. Afterwards, back on DS9, we get to see the fruits of all their newly built relationships. The end.
Very good. Father Cory, your overall impression of this one?
It's okay. I mean, as Jimmy said, this is a character development episode more than anything else. The Defiant being crippled is just the location where it happens. It's kind of a combination of like a submarine, episode and the episode where the Enterprise hits the quantum string and all the crew is in different parts of the ship. Yeah, it's okay. That's all I really can say about it. It's okay.
All right. Jimmy, how about you?
I think I liked it better than Father Cory. I like all the character development, and I like the episode overall. The plot is, pretty simple. Series of disasters set up a series of side quests, which all then get resolved, and they're all character building moments, and I like that. Even though I'm very plot focused, I do care about characters that we're invested in, and we're invested in these characters, and I like to see their relationships grow. This is a key moment for many of them. Like Kyra and Sisko, this is a big turning point in their relationship. There are things I don't like about it. The main one being, some of them, like the Julian Jadzia plot, is pretty minimal. Mm-hmm. Though it does have some character building there. But the main thing I don't like about it is the relationship between Quark and the alien trade delegate, who's played by James Cromwell, pre-Zephram Cochrane. And his name is Hannock, and he's from a race that has a very primitive understanding of economics that is commonsensical but dead wrong. And Quark does not explain capitalism to him properly. And this is because the writers of the show are Hollywood liberals who themselves do not understand capitalism. And so what Quark is doing in trying to explain his perspective to the to Hanuk is like a caricature of capitalism. It's like this is how Hollywood imagines capitalists think. And maybe it is how Ferengi think, but it is not an adequate presentation of capitalism in response to this guy's views.
Yep.
So, and the guy thinks he's a capitalist. He just doesn't understand the essence of capitalism. This guy has more of a mercantilist philosophy. So I don't like that about it and have never liked that about it. But otherwise, I like the episode.
Well, I want to get deeper into that as we go along.
There's also a huge scientific mistake in it too, but I can forgive them for that because I don't think they knew the truth on this one in the 1990s.
Okay. We'll get to that too. As I'll give my impression, which is, I feel like every series Discovery does a Starship as submarine story. I didn't check to make sure, but certainly TOS did it. Wrath of Khan kind of does it with the Reliant, and I think TNG does it. So and certainly this is another one of them. This is where all series have gone before. It was nothing really new, in that sense. It was a trope designed to get the characters into a certain situation where we had to have these relational moments, and I did like a lot of these relational moments. And as you mentioned, that we did have some development. This is a 4th season episode. This is smack dab in the middle of the 4th season, or in the first half of the 1st season, 4th season.
This is by Deep Space Nine had become good by this time,
right? And it's surprising it took so long for some of these things to develop, like the Kyra and Sisko relationship to make this turn. But we can get into that because we start with this episode where Kyra and Dax are discussing on the bridge that it's a holiday. Dax offers a snack to Kyra, and Kyra refuses because she's fasting, which I like this. One of the nice things about DS9 is we have a character who is religious, observes their religion, and is not a weirdo.
Yeah.
I'm fasting.
And specifically, this is a religious holiday that's based on Sisko as the emissary.
Yep.
Right.
This is the anniversary of his arrival. So the Bajorans fast. They had a feast, and now they fast in Thanksgiving for his arrival. And so Kyra is fasting today.
And it highlights this tension in the show, which is between Kyra, her relationship to Sisko as her commanding officer and friend, it develops, but also as this religious figure in her religion. And I can see where this would be a very difficult line to tread.
And especially as Sisko himself is very uncomfortable with this role as emissary. He really, and they call it out, where the reason why they went on this mission on the day they did was so that he wasn't in the region of Bajor when the holiday was being celebrated.
To have to take part in the ceremonies. Yeah. Because he's uncomfortable. Yeah.
By the way, the moment where Jadzia is offering her the snack, it reminds me of a real life incident. I know a woman that 20 years ago, she was from a Southeast Asian culture. She was in Southeast Asia, and she had a Muslim background, but was interested in becoming a Christian, which is why I was working with her. But she worked in an office that had people of Muslim culture and Chinese culture, and so it was a multicultural, and British culture. So it was a multicultural office. And then Chinese New Year rolls around. Now, Islam has a strictly lunar calendar, which means their lunar calendar does not reset based on what the sun is doing. So it's not like the Hebrew calendar, which was a lunisolar calendar. It's just based on the moons. And that means their year is 354 days long. And so if you have a year that is 354 days long, it is not going to stay in sync with what the sun is doing. So all of the months over time are going to rotate around the seasons. So you could have, the first month of the year. Sometimes the first month of the year is going to be in the winter. 30 years later, it's going to be in the summer. And so this is something really stupid about the Muslim calendar. But what that means is Ramadan, the month of fasting, shifts around through all of the seasons. And this particular year, it happened to be at the time of Chinese New Year. And so my friend is in her office. She's outwardly a Muslim, so she's observing the fast. And her friends are Chinese, and they're coming up to her. It's like, hey, it's Chinese New Year. You want to have some of our Chinese moon goddess cookies? And she's like, oh, sorry, Ramadan, which wouldn't be, the moon goddess part also isn't really that great, but Ramadan gave her an out.
Yes.
Yep.
I can imagine Muslims must love it when Ramadan's in the winter and not so much in the summer, because in Ramadan you fast from sun up to sundown.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in winter.
Now, and admittedly, for those Muslims who are from like Southeast Asia, Saudi Arabia area, that kind of balances out a lot more than it does for those up northern climes.
It is near
closer
the equator.
To the equator. Yeah.
Closer to the equator. So the days don't get quite as short down there as they do up here.
Yeah, that's right. That I don't want to go too far afield on that. But
by the way,
go ahead, Jimmy.
Also just to mention, this originally was meant to be more of a submarine episode than it was. Originally, they were going to crash in an ocean. And they were going to be stuck underwater, and it was going to be water pressure and water bursting into the ship. And Odo, the solution was going to be Odo goes into the ocean and through a crack gets into the ship and helps rescue them. And they had these big plans for doing this as a much more of a submarine episode, but they didn't have the special effects budget. And so it ended up being rewritten to be a gas giant. But the writers were really happy with the submarine draft, and they Ira Steven Burr apparently for the rest of the season, kept saying, "Hey guys, we could do that submarine movie and do it right."
I wanted to kind of finish up on the religious figure thing. Because one of the things that kind of reminds me of is sometimes, like Father Cory, you could maybe talk about this, is when you have friends that you knew before you were a priest, or family, but you're also a priest, or maybe even the pastor of the local parish where you're friends with. I mean, that's got to be that weird, awkward line that you're kind of going back and forth on. I mean, it must be similar to that.
Oh, very, very much so. With family, my family's pretty loose, so it's not as big a deal there. But definitely friends I've had before, and people I've made friendships with in parishes now, and especially with how much priests move and things like that. That's definitely a concern, and confessions, things like that becomes very much a concern. And also in between priests, with me and my priest friends, our relationship, we're still very good friends, and we love spending time with each other and hanging out and everything. But we also have those issues of, we do in many ways minister to each other as priests. And so we do have that aspect that comes in as well, and it, because it's always kind of the joke I talk about where, parishioners, you got it easy when it comes to confession. Just find out what time confessions are available and go. Now, whether or not your priest offers them enough times is another story, but go when you can.
Or if your priest wants to give you all kinds of advice that you don't need to hear, and it stretches out all the confessions, and you got this huge long line.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are concerns, but you still have times when you can go receive confession. Me, I can't look in the mirror and I absolve myself. That doesn't work. I have to go find one of my priest friends for that. So. And vice versa. So, I mean, it is very much a real concern. There is kind of that balance of, yes, you're my friend, but you're also my pastor, or you're a priest, and I have respect for priests and how this all works. So, I very much sympathize with that.
And it's interesting as the story progresses with Sisko getting injured, and Kyra has to, she's kind of have these warring emotions in her. One. My friend, my commanding officer, my friend, but also you're the emissary. You can't die. Like you are the fulfillment of prophecy. If you were to die, that would mean that you weren't the emissary, or that the prophets were wrong, and it creates a crisis of faith in her. And so she kind of retreats to saying, I don't know what the solution is, so I'm just going to pray. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, that is so awesome to see. Because sometimes I know for me with my faith, Lord, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know what the solution is. So I'm just going to pray and leave it up to you. And that's kind of what she does.
Their conversation goes through stages. It starts with, or at least what we see of their conversation. So, okay, so here's the scientific mistake. In the Jem-Hadar attack on the ship, the bridge is hit and all the systems are knocked offline, and Sisko is like knocked in the head and injured. So he's laying on the floor, and they get an emergency med kit, and Worf is about, and Kyra gets out a dermal regenerator and treats the visible cut on his forehead. Mm-hmm. And then she pulls out a tricorder and starts scanning the inside of his head and determines he's concussed and has intracranial bleeding. Okay, tip number 1, use the tricorder first, treat the surface wound afterwards.
Yeah.
But Kira's not a nurse, so, I would care more about this if Julian had done it.
Yep.
Right.
But then Worf is bugging out to go to engineering to try to get control of the ship from there. And he tells Kyra he cannot be allowed to fall asleep. And this was, for a long time, a belief in the medical community that if someone was concussed, you needed to keep them awake or it could be dangerous. Their condition could worsen. Hogwash. That is not true. Whether you are awake or not, it doesn't matter. What does matter is your ability to monitor the person's symptoms. Are they getting worse or not? Mm-hmm. It's not that they will get worse if they're unconscious, but if they are unconscious the whole time, you can't ask them questions like, do you know your name?
Right.
And so you don't really need to keep the person awake. You can let them sleep, but you need to wake them up periodically and ask them questions to monitor their conditions. But as far as I can tell, in the 1990s, this idea was prevalent that you never let a concussed person fall asleep. And after all the records got destroyed in World War III, I'm guessing they hadn't yet rediscovered that by the 2380s.
Sure.
So Kyra is thinking she's got to keep him awake. And in the conversation, the first thing we hear is she's got this maybe we can go to a 4 watch rotation for the crew. And then she starts talking about that and thinks that's just trivial. I shouldn't be talking to you about work. I'm not supposed to bore you to death. What do we normally talk about? And Sisko says, well, we talk about work. And that, and then that leads her to explore the fact that, we do you kind of keep me at arm's length because you're not comfortable with how I feel about you religiously. So we haven't really bonded as friends. We keep everything on a professional work basis. And then he says, tell me a story. And so she starts telling him a folk tale about 3 or 4 brothers who have a giant kava root and they get into a dispute. It's kind of like one of the tales from the Canterbury Tales. Only instead of the 3 brothers don't end up killing each other over the money, they decide to give the money away and go back to being farmers.
Yeah.
And so then in the middle of the story, she gets so frustrated. She says, your medical condition is worsening and I can't care right now if you're uncomfortable with this. I'm just going to pray. And she starts praying in Bajoran. And then he seems to get better. And he asks her to finish the story, which she does. And then he says, tell me another story. And at that point, they've bonded on a more personal level. And then when they get back to the station, he first suggests, why don't you look into that 4 crew rotation plan more? Mm-hmm. And then he invites her to a baseball game for the first time ever.
Right. And tells her to go to Quark because he'll have the hot dogs.
Yeah.
And she says, hot dogs? Like, she's thinking like canines that are hot?
Those Earth pets that you keep as pets?
Quark will know.
Now, to give Major Kyra some benefit of the doubt, most of her medical experience was probably literally battlefield. Mm-hmm. So you do fix the outside first because that's the thing you can fix when you're on the battlefield.
Right. Yeah. Battlefield trauma training. I did. So I did like that one. And then we have the situation with Worf and O'Brien and the engineers. Now I got to back up a bit. There's a moment where they're under attack and Sisko comes up with the idea to convert some planetary probes into makeshift homing torpedoes. And he gets O'Brien on the view screen and he tells him, O'Brien says, it'll take 20 minutes to put the warheads in the atmospheric probes. And Sisko says, you have 10. And O'Brien, Colomini, smirks. And you know that's exactly what he expected. Like, I will tell you 20 minutes because it takes 10 minutes, and that's what you're gonna tell me to do it in.
It's like Scotty in the Relics episode where it's,
yes,
you never tell him how long it takes. You tell him twice as long. Then you look like a miracle worker.
4 times as long. Yeah.
Four times as long. Yeah. Yeah. So you know that I just feel like O'Brien was totally knew exactly what was coming when he said 20 minutes.
Well, then O'Brien does it himself at the end where, it'll take us 16 hours to fix the ship. You've got 12.
Yes. So yeah, that is, I did like that. And it's interesting, the whole thing with Worf is so Worf has shown up on DS9 from the Enterprise
recently
at the beginning of this season, and he needs to fit in, and he's in this new strategic operations officer role, which is new for him, and he's trying to, I don't know, assert his command authority. He's now in the command track.
He needs to learn how to command humans. He's been in the position of being led by humans, but of course he's got the Klingon mindset of, I'm ordered to do this, therefore I do this, and that's it.
Yeah, they have this whole arc over the course of this season of helping Worf fit in. This is not my favorite scene in that. This is a nice sequence. My favorite scene is one earlier on where Worf and Odo, the two most standoffish characters on Deep Space Nine, are commiserating about having to interact with other people. And Worf is like, oh, Chief O'Brien wants to like invite me over and have conversation. And they're talking about the appropriate response is to be even more standoffish. But here, so Worf is used to commanding Starfleet officers, and O'Brien says to him, these engineers are not Starfleet officers. They didn't go to the academy. They're enlisted. They're enlisted.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're problem solvers. So what you need to do, instead of barking at them and correcting them and being super strict with them, which Worf had being, you need to give them a problem and then get out of their way and let them solve it. And you also can be supportive from time to time. And so Worf starts to do that. He's still very stiff in how he does it, but they have a problem. He's not just barking orders at him anymore. They have an engineering problem, and he says, we have this problem that needs to be solved. And the two engineers he's talking to immediately start a discussion and figure out how they can go about this. And so he starts to see immediately the benefits of the approach that O'Brien has recommended, and it all works. And then at the end, when we're back on the station, they present him with a repair plan for the ship, and they're wanting his authorization, and he says, proceed at your discretion. So it's like he's totally trusting them now. And it's at that point, O'Brien says, how long? And they say, 16 hours. You can do it in 12. And O'Brien turns to Worf and says, you can give him slack, but you don't take your hands completely off the reins.
Right. Exactly. And it was a great leadership moment. Go ahead, Father Cory.
Yeah, and by the way, that's one of the things I love about DS9 as a former enlisted guy in the military, that they actually show enlisted troops in Starfleet. Right. This is the first, because none of the previous shows had any kind of enlisted ranks until DS9.
Right, not explicitly anyway. I mean, there was occasionally a hint that some of like the transporter chief was... here we have it explicitly.
And in the original series, we had Yeoman Rand. We had a few mission specialists, but not. It wasn't as clear. It's not
like
as clear
a sergeant rank or a petty officer rank or something like that. No,
right. And that's the thing is I like here is, Worf is used to commanding security troops. That was what he had on the Enterprise. And they're the most military disciplined of Starfleet probably, whereas engineers are. It's probably much more relaxed. And I think O'Brien's right, actually, in general with leadership. You identify people, you only take on people who are capable of doing their jobs, and then you give them the initiative to do the job as they see fit. Now, if they're not capable of doing that, then they shouldn't be in those positions. And I think that's a great leadership lesson here in Star Trek. So I thought it was pretty good. So we have that vignette, and then we have the Jadzia and Julian stuck in a turbolift. This whole sequence where there's a hull breach and some of the gases from the gas giant leak in, and this was all supposed to, instead of gas, was supposed to be water, and that would have made it much more dramatic. Instead, they're just like cough, cough. There's a little fog in the corridor.
They're huddling to keep each other warm, maybe, because they talk about how the walls aren't very thick. They're letting the cold of space in. Originally, this would have been they're huddling in a big puddle of water,
right?
And it would be obvious why they were needing to do that,
right? It is interesting, like, because she's injured, and she's pointing out to Julian how they're huddling together a year or two earlier, and he would have been using this as an opportunity to make a move on her.
Well, she doesn't say it that way. What she says is, a year ago, if you'd have done something like this, I would have thought you were just trying to be a hero.
Right.
And Bashir says, and now that I know you better, I realize it's just a really stupid thing to do. And he says, you're welcome.
Which it was. So the bulkhead is closing. The gases from the giant have got the planet have gotten into the ship, and instead of being the chief medical officer and going with those he did rescue, he instead jumps through the bulkhead before it closes and rescues her alone and leaves them all to their own. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. He also says that you just took several lungfuls of fluorine, and it's like, I hope you mean below only a few parts per million of fluorine, because fluorine above a few parts per million is extremely toxic to biological life.
Yes. Yeah. But then he kind of calls her out, like, oh, he realizes you liked me chasing you, and now you're kind of disappointed that I'm not chasing you anymore. So I thought that was kind of fun, little Dax moment.
And it is kind of a clearing of, even though there's not much to this plot, it is a kind of clearing of the air for the two of them, where it's like, okay, they've both reconciled with their prior relationship not becoming a romantic one, and we're okay with them going forward as friends now.
Right. One thing I want to mention, the homing warhead thing, that the plan that Sisko came up with was they'll home in on the nearest metal device, the metal body in the gas giant's atmosphere. And O'Brien brings up the obvious, or somebody brings up the obvious question: what if it doesn't detect the Jem-Hadar ship? Will be and that's a risk, and that's an actual thing in today's submarine battles. Is they send out homing torpedoes, and those torpedoes will eventually they can set them to just lock on to the nearest big metal thing. And if the nearest big metal thing is the ship it just came from, that could be a problem.
You would think they'd build a friend or foe system into those torpedo targeting systems, though, so it doesn't home in on a big metal object.
I would assume the newer systems have that, because I know they've had friend or foe with aircraft for a long time.
I don't want to get it too much. They are wire guided. Most torpedoes now are wire guided out to a very long range, but there's only so much wire, and so they can set them to home. But you have to be. It's complex. Like you don't want to be transmitting underwater a signal, because then that becomes a way for the other submarine to know where you are. So then it would have to be a passive system where it would have to recognize you passively. And that's a very complex thing. So, but yeah,
also at one point they're counting on that homing, because for the second Jem-Hadar ship, they're expecting it. I guess Worf is the one executing this, but they're expecting it to come in behind them, because they are trying to be 3D in their approach to being above or below, like in the Mutara Nebula. And they use that, expecting it to home back towards them, but to hit the Jem-Hadar ship that's about to zoom in and for an attack. Ridiculously close, because all attacks are ridiculously close on Star Trek, because you've got to get the enemy ships on the same screen.
Yes.
Yep. Also, there's a dramatic moment early on before Sisko is disabled, when the first disaster that happens is the hull pressure the pressure problem that where they need to seal the hull, and Sisko gives the order to seal the hull, knowing Jadzia is on the other side. Yep. So he just gave an order that he believed would lead to the death of not only Jadzia, but also his friend Curzon Dax.
Mm.
And he was willing to make that call anyway. And then he gets his comeuppance. He gets knocked in the head and almost dies.
Right. But you see the Captain Sisko, the one who does his duty, and that this is one of the reasons why he's my favorite captain, is he makes the hard decisions. He's confronted with them and makes them.
And he won't hesitate. And he won't hesitate either.
Right.
It's just like, this needs to be done. I do laugh though they had this whole explanation of, we're going to do this thing to find him. It's like, yeah, they just described active sonar. Speaking of things that must have been forgotten after World War III.
It basically active sonar. All right, let's talk about the Hanak, the Karema, and Quark. So the whole episode starts with this negotiation in the mess hall with Sisko, Quark, and Hanak of the Karema. And the what's happened is because the Dominion doesn't like the Federation meddling in its affairs, the Federation has started trade with the Karema through the Ferengi as intermediaries. And why didn't anyone think this was a problem at the Federation? The Ferengi are, of course, going to be cheating, because that's what they do. And so it's clear, Hanak mentions these levies and taxes and fees that the Ferengi are piling on top of the contracts,
which are making them unprofitable. So he's basically saying, we're going to cut off trade relations unless you can give me a better deal.
Right.
And when they only tell us what two of the fees are, but I got to give the Ferengi props for they don't sound unreasonable. At least you can quibble about the percentages,
right? But
the fee itself does not sound unreasonable. One of them is a 4% inspection fee for trying to find changeling infiltrators. Mm-hmm. Okay, having some kind of inspection process for changeling infiltrators is reasonable, and there could be a cost attached to that. If you're shipping trade goods, just like you have, screenings for other dangerous contraband that could be sent through the trade lines. Another was a 6% offset. So they're shipping Carmen fleece. And I checked, they sometimes pronounce it Carmen and sometimes Karemen. They should be clearer about that in the scripts to the actors.
Right.
But they're shipping this fleece. And so, that's going to have a negative impact on the people who normally make fleece in the Alpha Quadrant. And so in protectionist trade systems, you impose a tariff to offset the problem being caused by this cheaper import stuff. To protect, that's why it's called protectionism, to protect your local producers. And so there's a 6% offset for the Tarkalian sheep herders here in the Alpha Quadrant because of the competition from the Carmen fleece. And that sounds reasonable if you're a protectionist, which as capitalists, the Ferengi shouldn't be into protectionism.
Mm-mm.
But it sounds good to those Federation fools. And so, these don't sound unreasonable, but stacking them up, it can make your trade deal unprofitable.
Yeah. And of course, they got kind of the double play on words too with the fleece, because of course the Kremens feel like they're being fleeced.
They're being fleeced. Yes. Yeah, that's good.
And Quark, throughout this, he keeps trying to pivot, trying to, figure out a way to keep get on Hanok's side, get him on his side and to return to the Prophet. And his first attempt is to compliment Hanok on his lobes, his business sense, and then offers to cut him in on the deal so that they can scam the Federation together.
Actually, his first attempt is to blame Rom, and says, my mistake was I let my brother Rom do these contracts, and he's not as familiar with Federation law as Ferengi law, and he made a mix-up, and blah, blah, blah. And Hanok is not buying that. He says, no, you tried to cheat me. And at that point, Quark comes clean and says, you've got business lobes. You saw right through my attempt to cheat you. You're worth doing business with. Tell you what, let's team up and cheat the Federation together. And Hanok says, you're despicable. But what Quark ultimately wants to do is preserve a business relationship here. Mm-hmm. And so he keeps trying to find ways. His next attempt is to engage Hannock in the thrill of trade.
Mhm.
And this is where things get stupid. So he's talking to him about like, haven't you ever, sold substandard merchandise or overcharged for a product just for the thrill of it? And Hannock is like, no, I haven't. This is a direct quote. He says, the Karema believe that merchandise has a set value determined by the raw materials and the labor involved in creating it. Factor in transportation costs and a reasonable profit margin, and you arrive at a fair price. Okay, that's a Hollywood understanding of the basis of fair price. It is a commonsensical understanding for a person who has never seriously thought about economics. So it sounds plausible, but it is basically I guess, mercantilist rather than capitalist approach.
Yeah.
Okay. What it's missing is it incorporates factors that sound reasonable and that are part of what's a fair price for something: raw materials and labor and transportation and the need for the entrepreneur to make a profit so it's worth doing in the first place. All of those are factors that need to be considered in establishing price. But it views price reasonability exclusively from the perspective of the seller, not the purchaser. And as a result, it is a one-sided presentation of what you would think a fair price would be that does not involve the market mechanism, which is the core of capitalism. The basic idea in capitalism is you allow both parties, the buyers and the sellers, to agree on what a fair price is. You don't arbitrarily dictate it via prior concerns. Let's suppose, now the system that Hannock described can be reasonable in some situations. Let's say I want to manufacture, a hamburger. So I've got as a hamburger seller, I've got to pay for raw materials. I've got to pay labor costs to get the hamburger made. I've got to have servers. So that's my transportation costs. I have servers to transport the hamburger out to the customer. And I need to make a reasonable profit or it's not worth me doing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So under ordinary circumstances, if a customer is happy to pay, let's say it's $5 for a hamburger. If the customer is happy to pay that, and that covers all my costs and gives me a reasonable profit, then it's all fine. But then let's suppose a hurricane hits and hamburgers are not people's top priority. What they desperately need are something else, like antibiotics.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the reasonable price of a hamburger will plummet. And if I want to stay in business, I shouldn't be tied to the hamburgers. I need to start selling antibiotics because that's what people really need in the wake of this disaster. And so the price of the price of hamburgers you would expect to plummet in that situation. I might not be able to make a profit on them. I might not be able to cover my costs. What I need to do is meet the needs of the customers by giving them what they really need now, which is antibiotics. And if there aren't very many antibiotic producers, then you want the price of antibiotics to be high. So that will motivate more businessmen to get into the business of producing antibiotics so there will be enough to meet the demand. You need the price to go up in order to incentivize more production. And so this is how the market mechanism works, and it is not understood by most people, and it is not understood by Hollywood liberal writers. And so all they have Quark doing, instead of explaining the market mechanism to Hannock, where both buyers and sellers agree on what a good price is, given the circumstances that both the buyers and the sellers find themselves in, is he gives them this nonsense speech about the thrill of the chase.
Well, it also misses the whole competition aspect, which is, and that's where the thrill is for some people. Yeah. But competition, I'm a hamburger seller, and I have figured out a way to lower my production costs. So maybe I'm using cheaper meat, and so I'm undercutting the other hamburger seller, and so he's losing business. So what does he do? He needs to change his price, or he needs to change his value proposition and get people to understand that his burgers are better.
Right.
But it's like. it is, the economics that were presented here are way oversimplified, way oversimplistic, and not really reflective. And Quark is onto something where there is a thrill that some people get out of business, but it's not the thrill of cheating people. There is a thrill in risk, and we see that all the time in capitalism, but that's not the only reason people engage in capitalism. It's kind of silly in that sense.
Yeah, and so I can kind of get, okay, I guess Ferengis don't think. I mean, I'm sure Quark knows everything I just said about market mechanism, even if the people writing him don't. But the thing that sings for Quark is not the beauty of the market mechanism, although it would be an interesting take on the Ferengi if it did. The thing that sings for Quark is the thrill of the chase and pulling one over. And so I guess I can kind of accept Quark pitching to Hanok on this basis, but it's not really how economics works, and I view that as a weak point in this episode, since it raises the issue of what is a fair price and never gives us a plausible answer. It gives us a fake plausible answer.
They do a better job in another episode where Nog talks about the river, the Great River,
the Great Material Continuum.
Yes, right.
Too much in one place, not enough in another. It all needs to even out in a way that's mutually beneficial to everybody.
Right.
Which is what capitalism does. That's what the market mechanism does. Nobody is dictating prices. It's all mutual agreement between buyers and sellers. And so everybody wins in that situation. If you navigate the Great Material Continuum properly, that is.
Yes, right. But, and so Quark uses this opportunity of the torpedo the Jem-Hadar torpedo that it pierces the hull very nicely, by the way, that creates a seal, which is an atmospheric seal. But it pierces the hull, and he decides we're going to disarm it together. Like he's going to, and there's this, I don't know, what do they call it? Like the thrill of death-defying actions here, where and so it boils down to
a metaphor.
Right. And it boils down to a 50-50, chance. One of these, we have to pull one of these two things out of the torpedo, and one of them will make it explode, and one we will survive, and we just have to decide which one.
And disarm it. And they have no way of knowing. Oh, this also, so by the way, I like the bit where they're about to start trying to defuse the torpedo because it's making noise, and it's like, it didn't explode immediately, but it may explode soon if we don't disarm it, and if we do, everyone on the ship dies. Right. And so they're starting to disarm it, and Hanok is like, do you know how to get this open? And Quark is like, there isn't a lock that can't be picked. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a good Quark line, and that fits Quark.
Yes.
So they get it open, and then Hanok reveals he understands part of how its circuitry is designed, because he once saw a schematic of this Jem-Hadar warhead. And Quark says, when did you see that? And he says, at a trade show. We make these. We sell them to the Jem-Hadar.
Yeah.
And Quark is like, I thought you said you never sold substandard merchandise. This thing was supposed to detonate on impact, wasn't it? And Hanok says, maybe I should offer them a refund. And they both laugh. And then Hanok explains there's these two things. One of them will cause it to detonate. One of them will cause it to defuse. Yep. And they have no way. Hanok can't remember which is which. So Quark finally just randomly grabs one. And all in a flash, he just grabs one. And it turns out it's the correct one. They both survive. They're both immensely relieved. And this has become a metaphor for helping Hanok understand the thrill of risk.
Right.
And it was basically red wire, blue wire. Which one do you cut is what it came down to.
The idea that Hanok never risked anything ever in his life, he doesn't understand risk. I mean, it's hard to, you're a spacefaring culture. It's hard to imagine. And it was
risk, but it was also gambling. And that's the part that he really pushed against, was gambling.
Yeah.
Okay. It was a gamble.
And then we get him gambling back at Deep Space Nine, and gambling better and winning, and gambling better at Dabo than Quark expected him to, which Quark is a little chagrined about.
Yeah.
Yes, that was good.
Now, one thing I did get a kick about those two is how Hannock towered over Quark with good reason.
James
Armin
Cromwell's
Shimmerman
tall.
is 5'6". James Cromwell is 6'7".
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's literally a foot taller than Quark. But but they play that up too, though, where, I mean, it was, you saw the size difference. A lot of times, they'll balance that out with camera tricks and things like that, but they didn't hear.
Yeah. Yeah. That was good. Any other notes on this one, Father Cory?
Nope, nothing here.
How about you, Jimmy?
Nope.
All right, let's get to that listener feedback then. And our first feedback comes from our discussion on that Enterprise episode, Vox Sola. Paul S. on YouTube writes, so some retcon headcanon for Malcolm and the Shields is he was part of Section 31. As such, he was aware of reports or whatever about stolen shield tech and the latest reverse engineering efforts. Anyway, good discussion about the Snotbooger alien show.
Yeah. And as they do establish at the end of season 4 of Enterprise, Malcolm has connections to Section 31. And that could be an explanation for why he was aware of advances in shielding technology in this.
Yep. And he's security too. I mean, he was put on that ship as head of security, so it makes sense that he would be up to date on the latest security news.
Next to the chief engineer, who is enmeshed in the alien Snotbooger.
Right. Then the next email, it needs a little bit of background. It was in response to this emailer. She's been watching our episodes in order, and she got to the end of one of the Discovery seasons, and so she says, this is EP via email. I've not watched Discovery, but I'm confident that your episodes about the series are far more interesting than I would find the series itself. All the same, I was happy when I got to this episode, which is the season finale one, because it meant you would be discussing other series. I thought my favorite part would be hitting play on the next episode, but then you had this great discussion at the end about how the current generation of writers, and many people in general, seem to need more emotional validation than previous generations. Being a Catholic homeschooling mom of a large family, I sometimes worry about how my kids are spending their days compared to their peers. Instead of focusing on homework and getting extra study time in every day, which is what I imagined when I started homeschooling years ago, and same here, when we started homeschooling, they have to bounce back and forth between homework, cleaning, laundry, babysitting the littles, cooking, and those odd triage moments that pop up, like when your youngest child sneaks away and decides to make a mountain slide out of all the books on the bookshelf. That sounds very specific as an anecdote. Your discussion gave me encouragement. My help at home was valued when I was a kid going to traditional school, but the help of my older kids is not just valued, it is absolutely essential, especially when my husband is out of town for work. When they aren't helping out, they can immediately see the results. The littles get out of control, dinner gets burnt, things get lost, etc. I don't in any way consider this to be the equal of a national emergency like World War II or the Depression. We're not struggling for food or survival. But all the same, it makes me feel a little bit better about depending on them so much and having to work together as a family through the good and bad moments just to get through each day. Maybe, in a small way, it's helping them develop emotional resilience along with life skills.
Oh, I think it's more than in a small way. First of all, I know people are surprised with various aspects of homeschooling. One of the things is, oh, you mean you don't have to spend 7 hours a day in a class setting? Yeah, that just shows you how much of a regular public school day is wasted.
And then hours a day at home doing the homework that the teacher assigned.
Right, yeah. It's just there's a huge amount of time waste in public education. And you don't need that. You don't need that long to get an education in a homeschooling setting.
Nope. Well, I even learned that when I was in high school, public high school. But my senior year, I took like an advanced math class, and the teacher would spend 15, 20 minutes giving us the lesson. We would spend 15, 20 minutes doing the homework, and then we'd go play on the computers for the rest of the class.
Yeah,
right.
But in terms of character building and preparing them for adulthood, I think what you're doing is great. Now, I've seen this in large families where, once you get this kind of production line going, and then once you have the larger number of kids, the first ones are old enough to assume responsibility, which is great for them. Because as an adult, you have to, what parenting is not protecting your child from life. It's preparing your child for life. And adults do have to shoulder responsibility. So letting them letting them have responsibility and see the consequences of what happens if they don't fulfill it early on is great for character building. Modern teenagerism is something that historically simply did not exist.
Mm-hmm.
It has only been in the last century that we have had this extended adolescence where kids had basically no responsibilities outside of school, and where they could devote all their time to playing video games or getting together with friends and things like that, and they had no responsibilities they had to take care of. And that's what's led to emotional fragility on the part of a lot of younger people today, because they've never had to be responsible for anything. And so they've never learned to be responsible. And they think everything is like it's supposed to be like it was in adolescence when I was catered to for everything. And they get in a snit and get offended when everything doesn't go exactly the way they wish it would go. So I think you're giving your kids an excellent foundation for adulthood.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you want to see the consequences of that mindset of this extended adolescence, you remember those videos that were popular about a year or so ago, where it's, a day in my life, and works for Twitter or something like that. And like I remember one where she did like maybe 3 hours of work total, and the rest of it was getting a pedicure and going to the spa and going to the cafeteria and having this catered lunch and all these things, and like did like one meeting and a couple of hours of work, and that was it.
And then
she got fired like a month later.
Elon Musk came in and got rid of 3/4 of the staff. As a dad of 5 homeschooled kids, I agree with all of that. The fact is emotional resilience is a key aspect of like people ask how can you manage to have more than 2 or 3 kids at most? Like once you've had 3, it's only additive. It's not like the first after they outnumber you with 3, that's the hardest. 3 is the hardest. But after that, it's just additive. And as they get older, you can give them more things to do. And in very large families, 12-year-old boys and girls can very well take care of 1-year-olds for a lot of things. And,
easily. And
giving them responsibility for each other and being responsible to each other in a family is huge. So I agree.
And if you have a 12-year-old who's learning to change 1-year-old's diapers, that's a great preparation for adulthood. They're not going to complain about things much less than changing diapers as an adult.
It's the lesson of adulthood is there's a lot of that stuff to deal with in adulthood.
I worked in a nursing home as a high schooler. Oh yeah, there's plenty of that going on there too. So I get it.
I could go on and on this, but that was an excellent letter and excellent connection to Star Trek. Thank you.
And by the way, I'm glad we're more entertaining and interesting than Star Trek Discovery. I mean, I know it's a low bar, but I'm glad we're above it.
Yes, it's very good to be above that bar.
I think we're better writers than those of the Star Trek Discovery series.
Yes.
Sure. All right, we'd like to take a moment now to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Mary M., Javier D., Jeffrey C., Father Mike S., and Rick S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to know what you thought of Deep Space Nine's Starship Down. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And you can also watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Voyager episode, Initiations. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you. Live long and prosper. And remember the 285th rule of acquisition: no good deed ever goes unpunished.
And Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, Tarkalian sheep herders, you have to feel for them.